A boy begged a millionaire to dig up the ground to find his father. But when he dug up the ground, the millionaire looked at the boy with great anger because, "Go away, kid. Knock again, and I'm calling the cops." The door slammed shut before the echo of the words had even died out. The porch light clicked off with a hard snap, as if punctuating the man's threat like a final period at the end of a sentence. The boy on the porch, thin as a twig and quiet as morning frost, didn't flinch. He simply stood there, blinking slowly, the sleeves of his wool sweater hanging past his fingers like drooping wings. Across the street, the frost hadn't yet melted from the grass. The sun was still hidden behind a veil of heavy clouds, the kind that made the morning feel like it had forgotten to wake up. A newspaper lay on the sidewalk, damp and unread. A woman with curlers in her hair pulled aside her curtain and stared out her window, her lips forming a silent cluck. She watched the boy step off the porch and disappear around the hedge, not bothering to open the door. In the backyard, Noah knelt in the damp earth. The shovel he used was too big for his hands, and every thrust into the soil made his wrists shudder. His knees were wet from the grass, and his cheeks were flushed with cold. Or maybe from something deeper, something heavy and sore that lived in his chest these days. He didn't cry. Not anymore. That had stopped around week 2, when his voice had gone hoarse from yelling into the ground. "Still," he whispered now, his voice barely louder than the wind slipping through the bare branches above. "Dad's here. Please, don't let him be cold." The ground didn't answer. It never did. But he kept digging. Noah Whitman was 8 years old. He hadn't smiled in 28 days. His mother had died 3 years earlier, and her absence had always felt like a dim room he wasn't allowed to turn the light on in. His father, Henry, had remarried a woman named Sharon, who wore too much perfume and liked to say things like, "Do you think I signed up to raise someone else's kid?" when she thought Noah couldn't hear. A month ago, Henry Whitman disappeared. "Vanished," Sharon said. "Walked out. Left without a note, a suitcase, or a goodbye." She told neighbors he'd run off with a woman in another state, somewhere warmer, more exciting. Noah didn't believe it. His dad wouldn't leave him like that. Wouldn't leave behind his shoes, his favorite coffee mug, his photo of Mom still on the nightstand. So Noah started digging. Every day. Same place. The earth behind the garden shed, beneath the birch tree with the dead limb. His father had once built a treehouse there before Sharon said it was a waste of time. From behind their curtains, the neighbors watched. Every day. Same time. Small boy, big shovel. Some thought it was tragic. Some thought it was creepy. "Mum, why does Noah dig all the time?" The woman stirred her coffee, watching the boy through the lace curtains. "Some kids don't grow out of pretending," she said. "Let it go, sweetheart." They let it go. That evening, Noah walked the neighborhood again. It had become a routine. He wore his good shoes tonight, the ones his dad said made him look like a little gentleman. His sweater had a hole in the sleeve, but he'd pulled it tight so no one would see. At the first house, he knocked gently. A light came on. A frail woman opened the door just an inch. "Mrs. Green, can you help me dig? Just one more time. I think I'm almost there." The old woman sighed. "I'm sorry, honey. That's not something I can get involved in." At the next house, he barely got his sentence out before the man shouted, "Morning you're knocking, night you're knocking. I don't care if your dad's under Mars. Stop bothering people." The door slammed. The porch light turned off. Noah stood there a moment. Then he turned, slowly, and walked home. Sharon was waiting on the porch, arms crossed. She'd been drinking again. Her voice always changed when she drank. Got thinner, sharper, like a wire, pulled too tight. "You think you're cute?" she hissed. "Out there knocking on doors like some lost puppy?" I just wanted... You think your dad's in the ground? That he's waiting for you to dig him up like some fairy tale?" Noah didn't respond. His jaw clenched. Sharon grabbed his arm, her nails pressing crescent moons into his skin. "You say one more word about your father, and I'll bury you next to him." Then she laughed. She always laughed after the worst things she said. That night, Noah lay in bed, the covers pulled up to his chin. The little lamp on his desk flickered slightly, casting gold light across the pages of his sketchbook. He was drawing again. A man was curled in a fetal position, deep underground, wrapped in something that looked like a tarp. Above the ground, a boy knelt, one hand on the dirt, the other reaching down through the soil as though he could still pull his father back. In shaky letters beneath the drawing he wrote, "Dad is cold." He stared at it a long time. Then he closed the sketchbook and turned off the light. Outside, the wind howled gently through the trees. But inside the house, it was very quiet. Too quiet. The coffee at Helen's diner had been bitter that morning. Not burnt, just tired, like someone who's been working since 4 and knows they'll still be standing when midnight rolls around. Edward Grayson didn't complain. He rarely did, even when the waitress forgot his toast or called him Mr. Gordon, like he was someone else entirely. He had spent the night before in the spare room of his old English teacher's house, a brick 2-story that smelled like lavender and old paperbacks. Miss Lundy had forgotten his first name, but remembered he loved French toast as a boy. Time was funny like that, keeping what didn't matter, dropping the rest like loose change. As he drove out of town the next morning, windshield wipers thudding in slow rhythm against the drizzle, Edward had no reason to stop. No meetings, no deadlines, no real obligations waiting back home. Just silence and grief, and the kind of stillness that only followed men who had lived long enough to outlive their own excuses. Then he saw the boy. It was subtle, just a flicker of color at the edge of a half-collapsed garden shed. A motionless figure slumped near a shallow pit in the backyard, curled in on itself like a crumpled jacket someone had forgotten in the rain. Edward slowed the car, pulled to the side. "Don't," Joanna said from the passenger seat, eyes locked on her phone, though her tone was sharp enough to cut glass. "It's not our business." Edward didn't answer. He opened the door, letting the wet air bite his skin, and walked toward the backyard like he'd been there before. The boy wasn't unconscious, just distant, blinking slowly as if waking up from somewhere deep underground. "You okay, son?" Edward asked, crouching near him, but not too close. The boy looked up with eyes that didn't fit his face, eyes that belonged to someone who'd seen too much and been heard too little. "My dad's here," the boy whispered, "right under this spot. He's cold. I have to dig him out, so he can breathe." Edward didn't respond right away. He looked at the earth, soft from the rain, scattered with leaves and claw marks that hadn't come from hands alone. A child's shovel lay nearby, worn from use, and the hole, shallow, no more than a foot deep, was evidence of persistence more than strength. "What's your name?" Edward asked. "Noah." "I'm Edward." Noah gave a single nod. The silence stretched. Joanna called out from the car, but Edward didn't move. "Why do you think he's there, Noah?" "Because I didn't hear the door. He never leaves without saying goodbye." Edward took that in slowly, like someone sipping a bitter truth they weren't ready for. "That's a good reason," he said quietly. "You want to tell me more?" Noah hesitated. Then his voice, dry and soft, began to spin pieces of a story that made no real sense, yet felt too raw to be false. His father had gone missing. His stepmother said he ran off with another woman. But Noah didn't believe it. His dad wasn't the leaving kind. He didn't take his boots, didn't take his coat, didn't take the photo of his late wife from the dresser. I think she hurt him, Noah said. I think she put him here. Joanna had stepped out of the car by then, umbrella in hand, trying to look casual, but clearly unsettled. Edward, she said under her breath, pulling him aside. You can't entertain this. He's a child. He's grieving. He probably watched some crime show and now... Edward raised a hand to stop her. Noah, he said, if I come back tomorrow, would you talk to me again? The boy nodded. The next day, Edward returned, alone. He found Noah sitting cross-legged on the porch, waiting like someone who didn't believe in luck, but still held space for it. The boy stood when he saw him, pulled on his sleeves, and walked Edward around to the backyard. This is where I dig, Noah said plainly, but I keep getting caught. She lets you dig? Edward asked. She hits me when she finds out. Before Edward could ask more, the screen door burst open. What the hell is this? Sharon. A woman in her late 30s, with dyed hair and tired eyes, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from resentment curdled over time. She wore a housecoat and carried a coffee mug like a weapon. You again? She said to Edward. This some kind of hobby for you? Talking to broken kids? I just wanted to check on him. He looked... He's fine, she snapped. He's always making things up, playing victim. Don't you have something better to do? Noah had backed up against the siding. Sharon noticed and stormed toward him. I told you, if you drag people into our mess, I swear to God. Before she could raise her hand, Edward stepped between them, catching her wrist mid-air. Not hard, not threatening, just enough. You need to stop, Sharon laughed. Oh, look at that, the white knight. Edward didn't move. He's a kid. You don't hit kids. You don't know him. Number. But I think I'd like to. Sharon snatched her hand away and stormed back into the house, slamming the door so hard a wind chime fell off its hook. Edward turned to Noah, who was trying very hard not to look afraid. Let's go for a drive, Edward said. Someplace quiet. Noah didn't say anything, but he followed. The pediatrician's office smelled like lemon cleaner and plastic toys. Noah sat on the exam table, hands in his lap, while Edward filled out forms at the front desk. No one asked why a man his age was bringing in someone else's child. No one asked if it was temporary. Later, as they sat outside the pharmacy waiting for cream to treat the bruising, Edward looked over. Do you believe me? Noah asked, voice small. Edward took a long breath. I don't know what I believe yet, but I'm listening, and I think maybe that's the first step. Noah nodded. His hand slid across the seat, brushing against Edward's. The boy didn't hold it, just let it rest there, close. Close enough to know he wasn't alone. For now, that was enough. Moondrum, the thrift store at the corner of Main and Juniper, had once been a bank. You could still see the outline of the old vault behind the rows of mismatched shoes and faded paperbacks. There was something solemn about it, like even things no one wanted anymore still remembered how to be locked up tight. Edward stood at the window, staring in without really looking. The glass reflected his own face back at him, a little older than he remembered, a little more tired, maybe a little more like the kind of man who didn't go home anymore. Joanna parked the rental down the block. She didn't get out immediately. When she did, she said, "You're not thinking of adopting this boy, are you?" Edward didn't answer. "I looked up the Whitman property deeds," she continued, voice brisk, practical. "There were a few weird transactions last spring. Sharon refinanced, pulled a cash loan against the house, small but risky, couple of short-term debts tied to local lenders." "She's in over her head," Edward said, almost to himself. "She's a ticking bomb," Joanna corrected. "And if the kid's right, I don't think he's lying." "Lying? Number, but kids don't lie the way we do. They believe. They fill in the blanks with magic and grief. Edward finally turned from the window. Then maybe the blanks need filling. They started with the neighbors. The couple next door, Edith and Marvin, kept a tight porch and a looser mouth behind closed doors. When Edward knocked, they were polite, but wary. Marvin answered the door with a wary glance and a low voice. "Look, we're not trying to stir anything," Edward said. "Just trying to understand what happened. You've lived next to them a while?" Marvin hesitated. Then, "Since the boy was 4. He used to be loud before his mama passed. Now he's quiet, but always out there digging. We thought it was a phase." "Did Henry say anything to you before he left?" Edith came up behind him, arms crossed. "Sharon said he ran off with a woman from Tulsa. Said she caught them texting." "And did you believe that?" Edith shrugged. "People disappear for all kinds of reasons." Marvin frowned. "Thing is, his car was still in the driveway." They didn't say much more, but it was enough. Noah's school sat at the edge of the district line, a squat building with tired brick walls and a playground with more mulch than equipment. The front office secretary, Miss Penny, blinked twice when Edward introduced himself. "Are you family?" she asked, eyeing Noah's file. "No," Edward said, "just someone who cares." Noah's teacher, Mrs. Lindstrom, met them in the library, where second-hand encyclopedias lined the shelves like forgotten soldiers. She had soft eyes and a clipboard she clutched like a shield. "Noah's a quiet student," she said, her voice carefully chosen. "Doesn't cause trouble. Doesn't speak unless spoken to, but he draws a lot." She pulled a folder from the clipboard. Inside were sheets of printer paper, crayon on top of crayon, layered and heavy. One showed a man beneath a tree, buried up to his neck. Another showed a shovel, a tarp, a small figure reaching down into the dirt. Mrs. Lindstrom glanced at Edward, then away. "We alerted the school counselor. Sharon never followed up." "Has she ever attended a parent-teacher conference?" Edward asked. "Not once." Noah sat in the hallway during the meeting, feet dangling off the bench. Joanna offered him a snack, which he didn't take. He just stared at the floor. At the sheriff's office, the lights were too bright and the coffee too old. Caleb Monroe had been sheriff since Edward's college years, back when his mustache had color and his shoulders hadn't slumped quite so much. Caleb didn't rise when Edward entered. He gestured to a chair and said, "Heard you've been making rounds. I just want to understand what happened." Caleb rubbed his temples. "The boy's got trauma. His dad disappears. He starts digging holes. Sharon came to us, told us he was seeing things. We figured he needed a grief counselor." Edward didn't sit. "He's saying the body's still on the property." Caleb finally looked up. "Edward, I've known you a long time. You're not a man prone to flights of fancy. Don't go starting something you can't finish." "Did you check the yard?" "We walked it. With dogs. Dogs cost money." Edward exhaled slowly. "He's digging in the same place every day." Caleb hesitated, then said, "That don't mean there's a body. It means he needs help." Edward left the station, not because he agreed, but because he'd heard enough. That night, in the guest room of the motel on Mill Street, Noah sat at the small round table with a sheet of paper. His tongue poked slightly out the side of his mouth as he drew. Not because he was focused, but because he was afraid. "I saw a shirt," he said, without looking up. Edward glanced over from the other side of the room. "In the dog run, before she got rid of it. Was it your dad's?" "It was plaid, red and black. My mum made it for him the year before she died. He wore it on weekends." "What happened to it?" "She burned it." Edward didn't ask how he knew. He just believed him. "And she buys dirt," Noah added. A lot. Said it was for planting, but we don't have anything alive in that yard. Joanna sat nearby with her laptop, typing. She looked up, said nothing, then went back to her screen. The next morning, Edward met with a man named Jerry Clay, an independent geosurveyor who owed him a favor from a land deal 3 years prior. Jerry didn't ask many questions, just took the address and nodded. I can get you surface readings, he said, and density comparisons. You want it quiet? As quiet as dirt, Edward said. There were no birds that morning. The sky had the color of old bandages, and the air carried that low, damp smell of things about to be disturbed. Edward waited on the hood of his car, sipping bad motel coffee from a paper cup that collapsed slightly with every squeeze. Across the street, the Whitman house sat still. Too still. The blinds in the front window didn't move, though someone had clearly peeked through earlier. He could feel it, the slight parting of fabric, the pause in breath, the moment someone realized they were being watched back. Caleb Monroe pulled up 10 minutes late in a department SUV. The man moved like a mailbox, square, immovable, dented by time. He got out without a word, checked his watch like it had betrayed him. This is reckless, he said, instead of a greeting. Edward didn't look at him. If I'm wrong, I'll pay the cost. But if I'm not, you're not a cop, Ed, number. But I'm a man with a shovel and a child with nightmares. Caleb sighed. You got your guy? Edward nodded toward Jerry Clay's van, parked just down the street. The geosurveyor stood leaning against it, arms folded, expression neutral, like someone used to showing up where he wasn't wanted. Caleb muttered something under his breath and walked toward the house. Sharon answered the door in sweatpants and a wine-stained robe. Her mascara had dried into little threads under her eyes, and her lips had that raw edge that comes from too many nervous cigarettes. She saw the two men. Her expression folded inward. What now? She asked, arms out. You bringing the whole damn city into my house? You want to watch me bleed? Edward didn't rise to it. This is just a soil inspection. In my backyard, she barked. Jerry stepped forward. Non-invasive readings, density mapping, no digging. Sharon scoffed, folding her arms. My husband walks out on me. My stepson digs like a lunatic. And now you people want to take apart my backyard like it's some goddamn treasure map. You think I planted a tree over his body? Is that it? Edward didn't flinch. Ma'am, you said he left. We just want to verify. She laughed, the sound brittle. Verify what? That I'm not a murderer? That I don't keep body parts in my freezer between the peas and the pizza rolls? Caleb shifted. Sharon, it's standard. Just a precaution. I'm not letting some stranger with a toy scan my yard. Edward stepped forward, voice low. If you refuse, I'll petition the county for a search warrant, and I'll make sure the media sees it. There was a long pause. Sharon narrowed her eyes, and then, in a theatrical twist of misery, slumped back into the doorway like a tired actress finishing her final monologue. Do whatever you want, she said. My life's already gone to hell. Jerry unpacked his scanner with the quiet rhythm of a man who'd spent too much time around conflict. The device was squat, rectangular, with ground-penetrating radar and a handle that looked like it belonged to a toy lawnmower. As he pushed it slowly across the yard, the screen flickered with red and blue bands. Edward watched from the fence. Caleb hovered like a disinterested chaperone. Back corner's off, Jerry said finally, tapping the monitor. Soil density's inconsistent. Disturbed about 3 to 4 feet down? Could be nothing. Could be something. Could be a body, Edward asked. Could be a body, Jerry replied. It's not a dog. Not that deep. Caleb's jaw tightened. We keep this quiet. Edward didn't respond, but his grip on the fence post didn't loosen. The forensic team arrived under false pretenses, a utility inspection, according to the dispatcher's record. Plain vans, unmarked uniforms, The quiet grace of people trained not to spook the public. The digging was methodical, the kind that slowed time. Every inch removed came with a breath held. Sharon watched from the porch with a cigarette hanging off her bottom lip, muttering into her robe pocket like it could explain her away. Noah wasn't there. Edward had left him at the motel with Joanna and an old deck of Uno cards. He didn't want him to see this, not like this. They hit plastic first. The team paused, recalibrated, kept going. Then came cloth, then hair, then skin. The lead tech, an older woman with hands too steady for this kind of work, turned and nodded. Caleb paled. Edward stepped forward, but not too close. He didn't need to see the face. The outline was enough. The position, the damage to the back of the skull, still visible through the torn plastic. They covered him carefully, with more gentleness than he'd likely been shown in his final moments. Word spread. As things like this do in small towns, it started in whispers at the post office, then became full-throated at the grocery store. By nightfall, every porch light on Noah's block flicked off when Edward's car passed. Every conversation paused when the boy's name was mentioned. At the motel, Joanna was sitting on the bed, one hand cupped over her mouth, the other holding Noah's latest drawing. It was different, simpler. A boy sitting beside a grave. No blood, no tarp. Just one sentence, written in careful, deliberate block letters. Dad is warm now. Joanna didn't say anything. She didn't have to. They didn't cuff her right away. Sharon sat in the interview room with one knee crossed over the other, her arms folded tightly as if holding herself together by force. The room smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. She glanced up when Caleb entered, but her eyes didn't soften. "Thought I might get an apology," she muttered. Caleb didn't sit. Edward stood behind the one-way mirror, hands in his pockets. "You said Henry left," Caleb said. "Ran off. Tulsa, wasn't it?" "That's right." "Then why'd we find his body wrapped in painter's tarp under your birch tree?" Her mouth twitched. A flicker, no more. "I don't know what you think you found." A man. Blunt force trauma to the skull. Plaid shirt. Wallet in his back pocket with his name on the license. She leaned back, tipping her chair slightly, eyes locked on the ceiling, like it had the answer she could live with. "He lied to me," she said finally. "He said we'd make it work." "You killed him." "I let him see who I really was." They picked up Jesse Lannister at the Greyhound terminal, trying to pay for a ticket with 3 crumpled singles and a pocket full of quarters. The man smelled like motor oil and cheap liquor. When they cuffed him, he asked if he could finish his sandwich. In the station, he cracked in minutes. "She said he hit her," Jesse said. "Said she needed to protect herself. I owed her. She helped me out once when my brother got busted. Gave me $200 and some scratches." "And you helped her bury a body," the deputy replied. "Didn't know he was dead until I saw the blood," Jesse whispered. "She laughed, man. After she hit him, big pipe thing from the shed, she just stood there and lit a cigarette. Said something like, 'That's the last time you cry over her picture.'" He started crying then. Not because of Henry, probably not because of Sharon either. Just the kind of cry people save up for when they know the road's finally closed. At the station, they brought in Paul Deacon and Bethany Royce, both from Henry's old construction crew. Bethany looked tired, like this day had taken something she didn't even know she had left. "He talked about leaving her," Bethany said. "A lot. I think he was scared of her. But he always said Noah wouldn't survive it." Paul nodded. She'd call him 10 times a day, ask what color shirt he had on, asked if he was talking to anyone. One time she showed up at a job site just to check if he had his ring on. They didn't look at each other as they talked. Bethany added, "I saw bruises on his arm once. Said it was from working under a beam. But we don't bruise like that. Not at 42. They left their statements. Neither asked if the boy knew yet. By afternoon, Sharon had stopped performing. No more eye rolls, no more wounded indignation. She just stared at the table with that fixed, vacant expression women wear when the last mask slips and the room's too quiet to pretend anymore. "I saw him crying," she said. "Crying. Not for me, not even for Noah, for her. His dead wife. I watched him holding a picture of her like she was still breathing. Said he missed her voice. Said she would have raised Noah better. I hit him because I couldn't take it anymore. I thought I could live with that." "And you planned to sell the house," Caleb said. "I had buyers lined up," Sharon said. "I just needed a clean title." "You buried him like garbage." "I buried him like guilt." It was raining when they walked her out in cuffs. The kind of rain that didn't fall hard, just soaked everything slowly until you didn't notice how wet you were until it was too late. A crowd had gathered, half pretending they weren't looking. Phones were out, faces half hidden behind umbrellas. Noah stood across the street beside Edward, a borrowed raincoat, 2 sizes too big, draped over his shoulders. His eyes didn't blink when Sharon passed. She didn't look at him. Or maybe she did, too quickly, too softly for anyone to notice. Caleb walked a step behind her. He didn't speak either. The moment the cruiser door shut behind Sharon, a hush fell across the street, like the end of a funeral. That evening, the town council met. Caleb Monroe was asked to step down. No drama, no yelling. Just a vote, a quiet agreement that silence had cost too much. Joanna didn't speak until they got back to the motel. She just handed Edward the file she'd compiled. Loan records, phone logs, the forged signature on a withdrawal slip 2 weeks before Henry's death. "She built it all like a story she wanted to be true," Joanna said. "And when it wasn't, she rewrote it." Edward didn't answer. He was watching Noah. The boy sat on the floor near the foot of the bed, flipping through his drawings. He stopped on one, the old one, the first one, with the hand reaching out of the earth. Then he turned to a blank sheet. He started again. This time it was a house. Just a house. No trees, no graves, no holes in the yard. A little smoke from the chimney. A window open. A boy and a man standing side by side on the porch. He handed it to Edward, not speaking. Edward studied it, then asked quietly, "What's this one called?" Noah looked up, eyes steady, voice soft but sure. "Warm enough." The building used to be a library. Now it was the community center, though no one called it that. The sign out front still read, "Carver County Library," half the letters missing, vines creeping up the side like they were trying to finish the sentence. Inside, there were plastic folding chairs, a bulletin board with outdated bake sale flyers, and the lingering smell of old paper, even though the books had long since been boxed and sold. This was where they brought Noah. Claudia arrived just after lunch, carrying a leather tote and an umbrella still dripping from the walk. She was calm in the way people are when they've done this before, not cold, just steady. She crouched beside Noah, met his eyes. "Noah, my name is Claudia. I work with the Department of Child and Family Services." He didn't speak. "We're going to find a place for you," she said, gently. "A good one." He blinked once, like it hurt. Joanna was there too. She gave Claudia a respectful nod and stepped aside while Edward watched from near the window. Claudia stood, handed Edward a slim folder. "These are the initial options. All approved families, all within the state. One's in Junction City. Another's about 90 miles east. Third one is closer, but they're at capacity for the next month." Edward opened the folder. Stock photos. Descriptions like stable income, non-smoking, own a dog, church attending. Nothing wrong. Nothing right either. Noah sat on a bench, hands clasped tight. watching a water stain spread slowly across the ceiling tile above him. Later, in the motel parking lot, Joanna lit a cigarette. She didn't finish. "You okay?" she asked. Edward didn't answer. "He'll be placed with a family," she said, "or maybe a long-term group home. Claudia's good. She screens them hard. And you have a company to run, a life to get back to." He gave her a look. "I'm not being cruel," she added. "Just practical." "That's not what this is," Edward said. "I know. But practicality isn't the enemy of compassion. You helped him. You brought the truth out. That's more than most would have done." "And yet," Edward said quietly, "he's still alone." Joanna's voice dropped. "Sometimes that's the part we can't fix." They said goodbye at dusk. Claudia promised to stay with Noah until the transfer paperwork cleared. She'd keep him here, at the center, for 2 or 3 nights at most. It wasn't ideal, but it was the system they had. Joanna knelt beside him one last time. "Stay brave, okay?" she said. Noah nodded. It was stiff, but real. Edward stepped forward. He didn't try to say something profound, just placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You know where I am," he said. Noah looked up, lips tight. "And you still believe me?" he asked. Edward hesitated only a second. "Yes. And I promise, we won't forget you." Then they left. The boy didn't nod, didn't blink, just turned toward the window. If you are listening to this story when it is raining, leave a comment saying wind, and if it is dry, write storm. That night, Edward didn't sleep. He sat in the motel armchair, staring at the table where Noah had drawn only hours before. The crayons were still there, the paper, even the half-finished glass of milk. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was hollow. Noah lay on a cot near the window, blanket up to his chin, eyes wide open. He waited for the dark to shrink the world small enough to fit inside his chest. It didn't. He slipped out of bed without making a sound, put on his shoes, zipped his jacket. The hallway was empty, and the door lock was old, the kind you could lift with a little patience and a lot of silence. Rain met him at the edge of the parking lot, like an old friend, soaking through his sleeves within minutes, but he didn't stop. Around 2:17 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Sharp, urgent, too soft to be a cop, too quick to be room service. Edward opened the door and saw Noah, soaked through, shivering, rain dripping from the hem of a jacket several sizes too big. His face was blotchy, his shoes caked with mud, but his hands were still clutching the same drawing, now smudged at the edges. Noah didn't wait. He stepped forward, wrapped his arms around Edward's waist, and whispered into his shirt, "I can clean. I can sweep. I don't eat much. I won't be loud. I promise." Edward knelt, soaked instantly by the puddle Noah brought with him. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're a boy. Smart and brave boy. I just don't want to be alone." Joanna appeared in the hallway. The backlog of work these past few days was so overwhelming that she had to stay in the Grayson Mansion's office all night. She'd take a towel in one hand, a phone in the other. She froze when she saw them, mid-step, mid-decision. Noah looked up at her, eyes pleading, but not desperate. It wasn't a negotiation. It was surrender. Joanna's fingers tightened around the towel, then slowly let go of the phone. She set it down, walked over, draped the towel over Noah's shoulders. "I won't tell if you don't," she said quietly. Mildred Ashford met them at the gate with a lantern and a scowl. She'd been Edward's housekeeper for over 20 years. She didn't believe in letting children run barefoot, nor in leaving the porch light on too long, but she believed in warm bread and second chances, though she'd never say it out loud. "Well," she said, eyeing Noah from top to bottom, You're smaller than I imagined. Come in before you freeze solid." Noah followed her in, towel still around his shoulders. Joanna carried his soaked drawing like it was something fragile. Edward walked behind them, slower somehow. Inside, Mildred pushed a plate of scrambled eggs toward Noah. "I don't eat eggs," the boy said. "You do now." He took a small bite, then another, then silently polished off the entire plate. Mildred poured him a glass of milk, then reached up and plucked a biscuit from the tin above the fridge. She slid it over without a word. Joanna leaned in to whisper, "That's the good tin." "Don't start," Mildred snapped. "He's had a day." Laurie came downstairs in the morning, rubbing her eyes, dragging a stuffed dinosaur by the tail. She saw Noah sitting at the kitchen table with a biscuit in his hand and tilted her head, like a bird, figuring out a puzzle. "Who's he?" she asked. "That's Noah," Edward said. Laurie walked up and stared at him. She didn't smile, just reached into her robe pocket, pulled out a red crayon, and laid it next to his plate. "We can draw later," she said, "if you want." Noah didn't speak, but for the first time in days, he smiled. No one said the word home, not at first. The Grayson house sat at the end of a quiet road, behind a split-rail fence and a long stretch of gravel that clicked under every arriving footstep. It wasn't grand in the way magazines made things grand, but it was careful. Porch swing oiled each spring, hedges trimmed with pride rather than precision, windows that caught the sunrise just so. Noah moved through it like a borrowed coat. He folded his hands when he sat. He whispered, "Thank you," when no one asked him to speak. He woke early, made his bed with military corners, and waited for someone to tell him what to do next. Mildred Ashford, who had once convinced 3 generations of Graysons to eat broccoli without complaint, gave him a tea towel and a stack of linen napkins. "You're folding these," she said. "Not building a tent. Edges together, corners sharp, like you mean it." Noah nodded, already folding before she turned away. Later, she showed him how to crack eggs with one hand, how to keep the yolk from splitting, how to sprinkle salt without making it taste like the ocean. "Never trust a scrambled egg that's too yellow," she told him. "Means someone's lying." Noah didn't ask who she meant. He just watched, learned, nodded. Ben Harper, the gardener, was the kind of man who spoke to plants when no one was around. He was retired now, mostly. Still came by twice a week because, as he put it, the roses hate change. He found Noah kneeling in the dirt behind the rose bushes one morning, poking a worm with a stick. "You want to learn something worth knowing?" Ben asked. Noah looked up. Ben handed him a tattered journal with pages stuffed full of leaves, dried, labeled, carefully pressed. Oak, elm, birch, tulip, poplar. Flowers, too, some brittle and yellowed with age. "Started it when I was 10, Ben said. "Kept it going ever since. It's not much, but neither is most of what lasts." Noah took the journal like it might crumble. He flipped a page, then another, and then didn't stop until Mildred called them in for lunch. Laurie was not, by nature, a soft child. She was curious, blunt, a little territorial. When Noah first moved in, she watched him like he was a stray dog, cautious, quiet, tail tucked under. But children, when left alone, don't stay strangers for long. It started with coloring. She handed him crayons in silence. He returned them in color order. She asked if he liked dinosaurs. He said no, but sat through her lecture on stegosauruses anyway. By the end of the week, they were sharing snacks, giggling over comics, spelling out words in magnetic letters on the fridge. Noah drew mostly trees and windows. Laurie drew suns with too many rays and girls with capes. One afternoon, she looked at his drawing and said, "You forgot the sky." Noah looked up. "I don't think the sky's always there." Laurie didn't argue. She just handed him a blue crayon and said, "Then you can draw it back in when it is. Joanna was last to soften. She worked from the corner office upstairs, door cracked, laptop always open. She still answered calls with a clipped tone, still double-checked receipts and grocery lists with a red pen. But slowly, her posture shifted when Noah entered a room. She stopped checking her watch when he sat nearby, let his drawings pile on the kitchen counter. Once, she caught herself humming when he asked if she'd like tea. One night, she asked Edward quietly over dinner, how did he survive it and still look people in the eye like that? Edward didn't answer. He was watching Noah across the table, carefully slicing an apple into perfect quarters. On a quiet Tuesday, Noah walked into the living room with a rolled piece of paper under his arm. He climbed onto the couch, reached above the mantel where Edward kept old family photos, and tacked it there with 2 pushpins. Edward looked up from his newspaper. The drawing was simple. 4 people around a dinner table. One older man, a woman with a bun, a boy, and a girl with curly hair and big teeth. The lines weren't perfect. The hands looked like mittens, but the colors were warm, and the sun was visible through a window drawn just behind the father's chair. At the bottom, in Noah's careful block letters, it read, "Family is where nobody gets buried alone." Joanna blinked too hard, then busied herself with clearing the dishes. Edward stood, walked to the mantel, and ran a hand across the paper like it might fade. "Did you draw this today?" he asked. Noah nodded. "Do you want to tell me about it?" Noah shrugged. "It's just dinner." That night, as thunder rolled far off in the hills and Laurie fell asleep clutching a stuffed tiger with a missing ear, Edward sat with Noah in the boy's new bedroom. It was still spare, still quiet. But the sheets had been chosen by Laurie, the curtains tied back by Mildred. The bookshelf, half full, already bore titles worn soft at the corners. Edward pulled the blanket up around Noah's shoulders. "I lost someone too," he said. Noah looked at him. "My wife. Years ago. She was soft-spoken and terrible at baking, but she could make a room feel like a hug." Noah didn't speak, but his eyes blinked a little slower. "I didn't think I'd ever be ready to have someone in this house again. Not really. Not in this way." From the hallway, Laurie's voice piped up sleepily. "Dad, if you're going to be mushy, do it quietly. Some of us are trying to sleep," Edward chuckled. "That's my daughter." "She's nice," Noah said. "She is. And she's not being replaced. Just getting upgraded." Upgraded? To a brother. There was silence. Then Noah said softly, "I'll try to be good." "You already are." He fell asleep, with his hand tucked under the pillow and his drawing notebook still open beside him. And somewhere in the quiet house, in the space between sleep and memory, a boy who had once been buried by silence was finally starting to grow again. Not all things lost are gone. Some just need light. The fish didn't bite that morning. Noah sat with his shoes off, toes brushing the moss-covered edge of the Grayson pond. The water wasn't deep, barely waist-high in the center, but it still held the kind of hush that made voices drop and time slow. Early sun caught on the reeds like gold thread. Dragonflies hovered like tiny helicopters above the surface, never landing, never stopping. Laurie kicked a flat stone across the surface. It skipped twice, then sank. "That was almost a record," Noah said, not looking. Laurie sat beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. "Almost doesn't count," she said, "especially with records." They were quiet for a bit. A heron rose from the far bank, wings like grey sails. Noah glanced sideways. "You know how to swim?" Laurie's shoulders tensed. He noticed. "I could teach you," he added quickly. "It's not hard. Just floating mostly." She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't go in the water anymore. Why not? She picked at a piece of bark on her sandal. Last year, I followed Dad when he went to check on a land site. It was supposed to be a short trip, but there was this river by the edge of the woods. Fast, cold. I thought I could cross it. Noah's brows pulled together, sensing something shift. I slipped, she continued, got pulled in. Dad didn't see me right away. The current took me under, and I remember thinking, this is it. I'm going to die with twigs in my hair. Noah's voice dropped. What happened? A boy pulled me out, skinny, fast. He didn't say anything, just dragged me to the bank and ran off, like he was afraid someone might yell at him for helping. Noah sat up straight. What did he look like? I don't know. Brown hair, wore a red and white swim team shirt, had a green towel tied around his neck like a cape. Noah froze. His breath caught. Then, without a word, he bolted to the house. Laurie blinked. Hey, what? But he was already running. Inside, he rummaged through the bottom of a wooden box in his closet, past folded socks and matchbox cars he never played with anymore. He pulled out a photo, worn at the corners. It was from the summer before his world cracked. He stood at the edge of the public pool, proud in his town swim team shirt, a green towel hanging from his neck, arms crossed like he owned the place. He returned to the pond, photo clenched in both hands, like proof of life. Laurie took it, studied it slowly. Her fingers trembled just slightly. It's you, she whispered. Noah nodded. The shirt, the towel. That's exactly what you were wearing. That was you. Her voice cracked. You saved me. Edward had stepped onto the porch, watching from a distance. He hadn't meant to interrupt, just to check if they'd remembered sunscreen. But he stopped mid-step. He knew that photo. He remembered that day. It had been his and Laurie's first real visit to the town. He'd been so distracted looking at acreage reports he hadn't noticed when she wandered off. She came back soaking wet, shaking, gasping about a boy with a green cape. Edward had asked around, called the park office. No one knew anything. It became one of those family myths, half memory, half miracle. And now standing on the porch in his slippers, he saw the same boy, different eyes, same soul. The photo trembled in Laurie's hands. She held it out like it belonged to something sacred. You saved me, she said again, softer. Noah looked unsure what to do. He shrugged, a little embarrassed. You were just floating there. I didn't think. I just grabbed your shirt. Pink shirt, right? You could have drowned. I was on swim team, he said simply. I wasn't scared of water back then. They sat quietly. Then Laurie did something she rarely did. She reached over and hugged him. It wasn't dramatic, just her arms around his back and her cheek against his shoulder. Thank you, she said. Noah's eyes shimmered, but he didn't cry. He only whispered, You remember now. I never forgot, she said. I just didn't know who I was remembering. Edward stepped down the porch stairs, crossing the grass slower than usual. They looked up when he reached them. He took the photo from Laurie's hands, stared at it for a long time, then looked at Noah. That day, Edward said, voice thick. I looked for you, all over. I wanted to find the boy who saved my daughter. Noah glanced away. I didn't want anyone to yell at me. I would have hugged you. Noah smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Edward crouched beside him, his voice lower now. You saved her. Before I knew who you were. Before any of this. You gave me back my child. Noah nodded, still quiet. Edward placed a hand on his shoulder. And now, I get to return the favor. That evening, as the sun slanted sideways through the kitchen window, Mildred made peach cobbler from scratch. Noah and Laurie took turns peeling fruit, passing slices into the bowl while debating whether cinnamon was a gift or a punishment. Joanna came in from the office, hair in a loose braid, tired in the way good days make you tired. She saw Edward staring out the window, photo in hand. He held it out to her. She looked, then blinked, then looked again. "Oh," she said softly. "It was him." Edward nodded. Joanna took a breath, then chuckled, almost disbelieving. "What kind of story is this?" "The kind you don't write," Edward murmured. "The kind you're given." Noah peeked around the corner. Laurie nudged him. "What are you waiting for?" He smiled, walked over, and placed the drawing he'd finished on the counter. This time, there were 5 people. 2 adults, 2 children, 1 older woman standing behind them holding a tray of biscuits. In the background, a pond, and a boy dragging a girl from the water. Underneath it, scrawled in soft pencil, "The day I found her, the day I was found." Joanna looked at it, lips parting just slightly. Edward didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arm around the boy's shoulder. And finally, Noah leaned into it. Autumn had a way of softening everything. The light fell warmer, even when the air didn't. Leaves gathered in corners of the Grayson yard like quiet visitors, rustling only when you walked past them, as if asking permission to stay. Edward stood at the window of his office, coffee cooling in his hand. He watched Noah and Laurie outside. She was trying to balance a pine cone on top of a fence post. He was pretending not to help. Behind him, Joanna stepped in with a folder tucked under her arm. "You're sure?" she asked. He turned slowly, nodded. "I've been sure since the night he came back." Joanna sat at the edge of the desk, flipping open the file. Inside were papers that didn't look like much. Printed forms, court seals, official language in 12-point Times New Roman. But they felt heavier than they looked. "I spoke with Claudia," Joanna said. "She'll expedite it. You'll still have to meet with a family court judge. There's a hearing, but it's procedural." She handed him a pen. "Edward Grayson, applicant for permanent guardianship of Noah Whitman," she said quietly. He didn't hesitate. He signed. The new birth certificate arrived in a plain white envelope. Edward opened it alone in the kitchen, late at night, while everyone else was asleep. The paper smelled faintly of toner and new beginnings. Across the bottom, in bold ink, it read, "Father, Edward Grayson." He ran a thumb over the line like it might smudge. It didn't. He didn't cry. But something inside him shifted, loosened, like the last board of a locked door finally giving way. Mildred made apple pie that night. Noah helped peel the apples, lips dusted with cinnamon and sugar. Laurie set the table and insisted on folding the napkins into strange origami animals that wouldn't sit flat. Joanna brought out sparkling cider and poured it into wine glasses like it was a gala. "We have something to celebrate," Edward said. Noah blinked, uncertain. Edward pulled the certificate from an envelope and slid it across the table. Noah stared, read the name, read it again. "Does this mean I'm really your son?" he asked. Edward nodded. "If you want to be." Noah looked up at him, then at Joanna, then at Laurie, who grinned and raised her glass. "To officially being stuck with each other," she said. Joanna clinked her glass to Laurie's and added, "And to the quietest, bravest boy I've ever known." Mildred made a noise in her throat. "Now eat before it gets cold." Later that night, Noah walked into Laurie's room without knocking. She didn't mind. She was taping one of his new drawings to the wall above her desk. "Is that the one from the orchard?" he asked. She nodded. "The tree you said looks like it's dancing. I liked that one." He smiled. She turned, arms crossed. "I'm still going to boss you around, you know." "I figured. But if anyone's mean to you at school, I get first punch. You draw better punches than you throw." She rolled her eyes, but her grin gave her away. Joanna walked in then, leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. She looked at the two of them, mismatched, patched together, but somehow seamless now. "I was scared at first," she said, "when you came." Noah turned to her, quiet. Joanna continued, voice softer. "Not of you, of what it would change, of how much it would hurt if we had to let you go." She crossed the room, knelt, and wrapped her arms around both children. "But now," she said, "I don't want to go anywhere without either of you." Edward stayed up later than usual. He stood in the doorway of Noah's room, watching the boys sleep. The sheets were tangled around his legs. One arm flung across a stuffed bear Laurie had declared non-negotiable as a bedtime companion. He looked peaceful, not like someone who had forgotten pain, but like someone who had finally found somewhere to set it down. Edward stepped in, knelt beside the bed, and tucked the blanket a little tighter around Noah's shoulders. "You saved us," he whispered. "Twice." Noah didn't stir. "I couldn't save my wife," Edward continued, quieter still. "I tried, but she slipped away. For a long time, I didn't think I deserved a second chance at a family." He brushed a bit of hair off Noah's forehead. "But you made me believe again. You reminded me what love feels like when it's given instead of earned." From the hallway, Laurie's voice called out, half asleep and half smirking. "Dad, you're getting all mushy again. I'm keeping score." Edward laughed, stood, and walked out. "You're still my number one girl," he called back. "I better be," she muttered, but she smiled in the dark. That night, something settled in the house. Not a silence, not a stillness, but a warmth. The kind that comes after a storm, when the power returns and the heat kicks back in, and everyone breathes just a little easier. And in the quiet room where a boy once slept with one eye open, the blanket no longer had to be pulled so tight. Because for the first time, truly and legally and completely, he belonged, and the house, once full of old ghosts and empty rooms, was, finally, full of family. Autumn draped the Grayson property in soft gold and rust. The wildflowers at the edge of the yard bowed in the morning breeze like they knew something sacred was about to begin. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind where breath fogged in the air and the silence held more warmth than sound. Out back, just beyond the old sycamore tree and the line of rose bushes Ben still tended, a small clearing had been cleared. This was the place, where the soil had once been disturbed, where pain had been unearthed. Now, it was to be reclaimed. A wooden marker stood temporarily at the center, simple and uninscribed. Around it, a circle of wildflower seeds waited in brown paper pouches, gathered over the weeks from neighbors, nursery donations, and Ben's careful hand. Edward crouched near the soil, sleeves rolled, digging into the earth with slow, deliberate movements. His hands, worn from years of paperwork and city meetings, now did quieter work, honest work. Joanna stood nearby, guiding Laurie as she scattered seeds in wide arcs. The girl had insisted on including marigolds, her mother's favorite flower, even if they weren't native. Mildred arrived last, holding a thermos of cider and a tray of buttered scones. She said nothing, simply placed the tray on a flat rock and took a seat, eyes watching the children more than the dirt. Noah knelt beside Edward, his fingers pressed into the soil, small but firm. He wasn't afraid to get dirty. Not anymore. He glanced up at Edward, voice barely above a whisper. "Dad's warm now, right?" Edward paused, meeting the boy's eyes. He didn't answer with words, just placed his hand gently over Noah's. Together, they pressed the seeds into the earth. Later that afternoon, the family sat around the kitchen table. The windows steamed gently from the warmth of cinnamon and clove in the oven. Mildred's apple pie cooled on the sill. Laughter, soft and shy, filled the room in patches. Noah had drawn something earlier that morning. He hadn't told anyone what it was, but after dinner, he slipped away and pinned the drawing to the corkboard in the hallway. It showed 4 people under a wide tree, its branches full of green and gold, its trunk bent just slightly like it had learned how to listen. On the left sat Henry, smiling, a hand on Noah's shoulder. Beside them, Edward leaned back against the bark, eyes closed. Laurie sat cross-legged, drawing in the dirt. Above, the clouds parted slightly, letting a single shaft of sun pierce through. Below the drawing, in his now careful handwriting, Noah had written, "Dad's not cold anymore, because now he lives in my heart. Rest now, Dad." Edward found the picture later that night. He didn't call attention to it, didn't pull Noah aside or praise the detail. He just stood there in the quiet hallway, the light dim, the house peaceful. His fingers brushed the edges of the drawing, and he whispered, "Thank you." Noah's room was different now, not just because it was full of things, a bookshelf, a nightlight shaped like a whale, a calendar he had started filling in himself, but because it felt inhabited, the kind of room that held breath and life and silence, that wasn't empty. Edward sat on the edge of the bed while Noah wrote in his sketchpad. "Can I tell you something?" Edward asked. Noah looked up. "Okay. I used to think second chances were for other people. That after you lose something big, someone big, you just shrink into yourself, like a coat that doesn't fit anymore." Noah was quiet. His pencil paused. "But then you showed up," Edward said, "and you didn't ask for much, just to be seen, to be safe. And somehow, you gave that back to all of us too." Noah blinked slowly. Laurie, from the hallway, called out, "If you're doing that soft, sad talking again, just know I'm counting. I'm gonna write it down." Edward laughed. "She's keeping me humble." "She's funny," Noah said. "She's your sister," Edward corrected. Noah smiled, a real one this time, a smile that didn't try to hide. "I think," the boy whispered, "he'd be proud. My dad. I think he'd be okay with this." Edward placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think he'd be more than okay. I think he sent you to us." That night, a gentle wind passed through the trees behind the house, and in the patch of fresh soil under the sky, where wildflowers had just begun to take root, something small and stubborn reached upward toward the moonlight, alive, growing, and finally home. There are losses that we think can never be healed, but then one day, somehow, love still creeps back, in the form of a hug, a look, or a soft call. Dad. Noah's story is not only a journey to overcome pain, but also proof that love, if sincere enough, can warm even frozen hearts. Have you ever met someone, even for a moment, but changed your whole life? I hope you are always healthy and peaceful. See you on the next videos.